In a perfect world, any problem between two people could be solved through communication and mutual understanding. But the world isn't so black and white.
We're learning more tonight about a Rhode Island woman who was brutally murdered in Vermont at a shelter where she worked.
When someone commits a crime, is it circumstantial, the cause of mental instability, or are people just born like this?
Watching you sit there, smile, laugh, and shake your head like this was no big deal.
In this video, we will go over 15 people the FBI wants you to forget about.
His name was Samuel Little, and he confessed to more than 90 murders.
Number 15. Samuel Little. This is Samuel Little, otherwise known as the choke and strike killer. He can be labeled as the most prolific serial killer in the United States history by the sheer number of confirmed victims.
He claimed 20 of his victims were in the Los Angeles area.
Little confessed to murdering nearly 100 women between 1970 and 2005. Born on June 7, 1940, as Samuel McDowell in Reynolds, Georgia, a small town in Taylor County with a population of only 926 people residing in the city as of 2020. In 1975 alone, Little has been arrested a total of 26 times in 11 states for crimes including theft, assault, attempted rape, fraud, and attacks on government officials. 1982, Pascagoula, Mississippi. The choke and stroke killer was charged with the murder of 22-year-old Melinda Rose Lepre, who had gone missing in September of that year. While under investigation, he was extradited to Florida and tried for the murder of 26-year-old Patricia Ann Mount, as prosecution witnesses identified Little in court as someone who spent time with Mount on the night before disappearance. Unfortunately, a grand jury declined to indict him for Lepre's murder, and due to mistrust of witness testimonies, Little was acquitted in January 1984. He spent time in California, moving from San Diego to Los Angeles, spending 2.5 years in prison for the attempted murder of 22-year-old Lori Barros and the strangling of an unconscious woman in November 1984. Upon his release in February 1987, Little committed at least 10 additional murders. He was later arrested on September 5, 2012, at a homeless shelter in Louisville, Kentucky. Little faced a narcotics charge, which authorities used DNA testing to establish that he was involved in the murders of Linda Alford, killed on July 13, 1987, Guadalupe Duarte Apodaca, killed on September 4, 1987, and Audrey Nelson Everett, killed on August 14, 1989. All of which were found dead on the streets of Los Angeles at the time. He was extradited to the City of Angels and charged on January 7, 2013. The police investigated the additional 36 murders committed in the 1980s, with the speculation of Little's involvement. 1980s, the Lepre case reopens, and officials test Samuel Little for the involvement of 93 murders total committed in numerous U.S. states. Over the course of his incarceration, he confessed to dozens of his crimes, drew portraits of his victims, and even conducted an interview to identify some of his victims.
Facing out where I could see anybody coming in. So I pulled her out of the car. She's too big for me to carry her. So I just pulled her out of the car and laid on that trash.
Why was Little acquitted at all for his earlier crimes? Surely earlier sentencing would have prevented such tragedies. The answer is, and for most crimes back in the day, there was simply not enough concrete evidence, as technology wasn't as advanced compared to today.
A 5-year manhunt, the North Carolina mountains.
Number 14. Eric Rudolph. Eric Rudolph is an American domestic terrorist who carried out a series of bombings in the United States during the 1990s and early 2000s.
Multiple bombings in 2 states. 3 dead and more than 100 hurt.
His bombings targeted various locations, abortion clinics, and the 1996 Summer Olympics in Atlanta, Georgia, to name a few.
Well,
Get out there.
Rudolph was born in Florida in 1966 and grew up in a conservative Christian household. He served in the United States Army with the 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell, Kentucky during the 1980s, before being discharged due to illegal substance abuse. He drifted in and out of white supremacist groups, developing a hatred for the United States government and what he says the moral decay of American society. In 1996, tragedy struck the Centennial Olympic Park during the Summer Olympics in Atlanta.
They're carrying somebody away right here in front of the AT&T Olympic Village. It's 1:20. We don't know where the bomb might have gone off at.
This became Rudolph's most infamous attack. He made 2 anonymous 911 calls, warning about the bomb before it detonated. Criminal masterminds have an ego about themselves to see if they can outsmart investigators. Luckily, Richard Jewell, a Centennial Olympic Park security guard, found a backpack containing 3 pipe bombs on the park grounds and helped evacuate the area before the bomb exploded, saving many people from injury or worse, death. Richard did well to stop the first bomb. What about the second bomb? The blast killed 1 spectator and wounded close to 120 others. Rudolph still remained an elusive fugitive. Despite a massive manhunt by law enforcement agencies, Rudolph managed to evade capture for several years, living off the grid in the wilderness of the Appalachian Mountains. He was eventually apprehended in 2003 after being spotted by a local police officer while scavenging for food in a dumpster behind a Save-A-Lot store at about 4 a.m. Rudolph was convicted of the bombings of 2 abortion clinics, one in the Atlanta suburb of Sandy Springs on January 16, 1997, and the other in Birmingham, Alabama, just a year after killing police officer Robert Sanderson and critically injuring nurse Emily Lyons. The Other Side Lounge of Atlanta, a lesbian bar, on February 21, 1997, injuring 5. He was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Number 13. Joseph Edward Duncan. A committed serial killer and child abuser, Joseph Edward Duncan and his crimes have sent shockwaves through the United States and have been the subject of widespread media attention.
He kidnapped those 2 children you just saw, Dylan and Shasta Groney, from the family's home, tortured them in Montana before killing the boy.
Growing up in Tacoma, Washington, Duncan's criminal behavior began at the young age of 15. In 1980, age 17, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for sexually assaulting a boy in his hometown, and as a result, spent all but 8 years in prison. He was paroled in 1994, but was returned to prison just 3 years later for violating the terms of his parole. In May of 2005, the Kootenai County authorities of Idaho discovered the bodies of Brenda Groen, her boyfriend, and her 13-year-old son in the family home in Coeur d'Alene. Authorities noted 2 other children were missing, Shasta, aged 8, and Dylan, aged 9. After an intense search for nearly 7 weeks, Shasta was found alive with Duncan at a restaurant, and with that, he was arrested.
Shasta Groney was the only survivor of the rampage and was rescued when Duncan stopped at a restaurant in Coeur d'Alene and Shasta was recognized by staff members.
Shasta reported he changed his mind. He was bringing her back to her father. He wasn't going to kill her anymore. Eventually, Duncan was found on death row in federal prison in conjunction with the kidnappings and murders of members of the Groen family of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. At the time of the attack, Duncan was on the run from a child assault charge in Minnesota. Duncan was also serving 11 consecutive sentences of life without parole in conjunction with the same crimes as well as the 1997 murder of Anthony Martinez of Beaumont, California. Additionally, Duncan confessed to, but had not been charged with, the 1996 murder of 2 girls in Seattle, Washington, Samiha White and Carmen Cubias. In March of 2021, it was reported that he was suffering from a terminal brain tumor. Court filings revealed he underwent brain surgery roughly 5 months prior. He refused treatment for his condition and shortly perished on March 28, 2021.
I do not have the slightest reluctance to impose the death penalty in this case, were it within my power to do so.
Number 12. The Hillside Strangler, Angelo Anthony Buono Jr. and Keith Bianchi. This is Angelo Buono, born to first-generation Italian immigrants from San Buono. Buono had developed an extensive criminal history, ranging from failure to pay child support, grand theft auto, assault, and rape. In 1975, the 41-year-old Angelo Buono came into contact with his adopted cousin, Kenneth Bianchi, a self-described ladies' man. Buono persuaded Bianchi to join him, assaulting 2 women he had been holding as prisoners. Together, these 2 would assume a singular identity and become the Hillside Strangler. the duo's first murder victim. She was found dead on October 18, 1977, in the hills near Griffith Park. She had been assaulted and there were marks on her body, which would soon become a signature of the killing spree. Judith Miller, age 15, found over the hills overlooking Glendale on Halloween. Liza Caston, age 21, discovered in the Chevy Chase Canyon area near a country club, November 6, 1977. Christina Weckler, age 20, at the Arts Center College of Design, November 20, 1977. Evelyn Jane King, age 28, near the Los Feliz Boulevard off-ramp of the Golden State Freeway, November 23, 1977. Dolores Cepeda and Sonja Johnson, ages 12 and 14, considered to be their youngest victims and found in a hillside near Dodger Stadium, November 20, 1977. Lauren Wagner, age 18, located near Los Angeles' Mount Washington. Kimberly Martin, age 17, found in a lot near Los Angeles City Hall. Cindy Hudspeth, the final Hillside Strangler victim, discovered in an orange Datsun abandoned midway down a cliff on the Angeles Crest Highway. She was 20 years old, a student and part-time waitress. The investigation into the murders was one of the largest in the history of the Los Angeles Police Department, with hundreds of officers working around the clock to bring the killers to justice. In January 1979, after intensive investigation, police charged Bianchi and Buono with the crimes. Bianchi had fled to Bellingham, Washington, where he was soon arrested by the Bellingham Police Department for assaulting and murdering 2 women he had lured to a home for a house-sitting job. After their arrest, Bianchi turned on Buono, and in order to avoid the death penalty, he confessed to the killings and sexual assaults.
To even begin to try and live with myself, I have to take responsibility for what I've done, and I have to do everything I can to get Angelo Buono.
Bianchi is serving a life sentence at the Washington State Penitentiary, while Buono died in prison on September 21, 2002, at the Calipatria State Prison in California, where he was serving a life sentence. Number 11. John Allen Kendrick, an escape artist, bank robber, and tri-state gang member whose career spanned 4 decades. This is John Allen Kendrick. He was listed on the FBI's top 10 most wanted in late 1955 and was apprehended by the FBI that same year. This is his story. John Allen Kendrick was first caught by the Baltimore Police Department and charged with larceny and murder in May 1923. He was convicted of larceny and a reduced assault charge, sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. Kendrick spent the next few years in and out of prison for shooting a police officer in Washington, D.C. He broke his 10-year sentence at the federal penitentiary in Lorton, Virginia, on July 3, 1933. He joined the Tri-State Gang, a group of Depression-era bank robbers and stick-up men active in the mid-Atlantic United States during the early to mid-1930s. The gang was responsible for countless robberies in Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, and Washington, D.C. He was eventually arrested in June 1934 and ended up in Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, where he remained to finish his 10-year sentence. But instead of being released, he was instead extradited to New Jersey to finish his original prison sentence for the 1930 weapons charge. He was finally released after being granted parole in June 1943. 4 years later after his release, Kendrick was arrested for the murder of an underworld figure in Washington, D.C. in June 1947. He was apprehended without incident and extradited back to Washington, D.C., where he was convicted and given a long jail sentence. Kendrick testified that he had been offered $2,500 to murder Michael Lee, but declined the job because, "When I got done paying taxes out of that, what would I have left?"
2018 murder of a Lamar High School student. A jury just returned a guilty verdict in this case.
Number 10. Kendrick Johnson. This is 21-year-old Kendrick Johnson, an alleged gang member who was sentenced to life in prison and a $10,000 fine after being convicted of murder in the 2018 shooting death of DeLindsey Mack. On November 4, 2021, a jury found Johnson guilty after about 3 hours of deliberation. When the verdict was read, Johnson's face was obscured by a face mask and little reaction could be seen. Mac's mother, however, cried when she heard the verdict read.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Kendrick Johnson, guilty of murder as charged in the indictment.
But Johnson wasn't alone. This is Kiona Mooten, age 17. She made her first court appearance weeks after a judge ruled that she would be tried as an adult. Mooten was charged with murder in connection with DeLindsey Mack's death on November 8, 2018. According to authorities, Mooten, who was 16 at the time, was accused of luring Mack to an apartment complex near Lamar High School, where Mack was shot execution style at least 7 times. It's time for today's subscriber pick, but before we get into it, please don't forget to like this video and smash that subscribe button. Click on the notification bell to get updates every time as well. One of our subscribers sent us this image. Now looking at the victim, ever wonder if the FBI has finally caught the man? Do you believe he's still loose? What would you do if you run into this person if they're on the loose? Here's where you come in. What do you think happened to this guy? And did the victim ever get justice? What could our twin from the back detectives do? Will they finally give justice to the victim and put this evil man behind bars? The answers await. Don't forget to comment down below with the hashtag subscriberpick and let us know what you think. Now, on to the next topic.
Ted, it is about 2:30 in the afternoon. You are scheduled to be executed tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock.
Number 9. Ted Bundy, bright and charismatic. These words would often describe Theodore Robert Bundy. The infamous Ted Bundy loved the attention his murders garnered him, and many in the United States were more than happy to give him that attention.
Good evening and welcome. This is the July 1st edition of 1986. Ted Bundy is not just another death row inmate.
The Western U.S. was his hunting ground, with an unknown number of murders piling up, mostly college-age women, from Washington and Oregon, all the way to Utah and Colorado during the 1970s. He was known for his good looks, charm, and intelligence, which helped him gain the trust of his victims. He often lured them into his car or apartment under the pretense of needing help or assistance, then assaulted and killed them. The bite mark case was one of the most famous criminal cases based on a bite mark analysis. In 1975, Bundy was arrested for speeding and evading the police in Colorado. He was identified by one of the few victims who managed a successful escape. He then subsequently, on 2 occasions, once at a courthouse, the other from the prison he was being held at, both in Colorado. In Florida, Bundy committed a string of heinous crimes, including the murder of multiple women. Arguably his most prominent victim, Lisa Levy, was killed in the Chi Omega house on Florida State University campus. Bundy had bitten her buttock, which ultimately led to his conviction in 1979 for Levy's and other sorority women's murders. Despite his charm and looks, his crooked teeth proved to be his downfall. After confessing to 28 murders, Bundy's final arrest and its aftermath captured the attention of the nation, as the accused murderer acted as his own lawyer during what is believed to have been the first televised murder trial, welcomed interviews, and boasted of the fans he had created. Some speculate he was responsible for hundreds of deaths. He was eventually executed in an electric chair in 1989.
I desensitized myself to it.
Number 8. Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was an infamous American serial killer and sex offender who murdered and dismembered 17 boys and men between 1978 and 1991. Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and had a seemingly normal childhood. However, as he grew older, Dahmer began to exhibit signs of disturbing behavior, including torturing and killing animals. In 1978, Dahmer committed his first murder when he picked up a hitchhiker, Stephen Hicks, and brought him back to his home. He then proceeded to bludgeon Hicks to death with a dumbbell and dismembered his body. Over the next 13 years, Dahmer continued to lure men to his home, where he would do cruel and unspeakable things to his victims before killing them. Dahmer was eventually caught in 1991 when one of his intended victims, Tracy Edwards, managed to escape from Dahmer's apartment and flagged down a police car. Upon searching Dahmer's apartment, police discovered a house of horrors, including preserved body parts, photographs of victims, and human remains in the refrigerator and freezer. During his trial, Dahmer pleaded guilty to all charges and was convicted of 15 counts of murder, receiving 15 life sentences. Dahmer was also sentenced to an additional 16th term of life imprisonment for the murder of Stephen Hicks. While in prison, Dahmer was beaten to death by fellow inmate Christopher J. Scarver Sr. in 1994. Dahmer's case remains one of the most shocking and disturbing in American criminal history. Many experts have attempted to analyze Dahmer's behavior, citing his troubled childhood, alcohol abuse, and potential mental illness as factors that may have contributed to his heinous crimes. Despite the many theories surrounding Dahmer's actions, the true motivations behind his murders remain unclear.
Eugene Palmer allegedly killed his daughter-in-law Tammy Palmer in September.
Number 7. Eugene Palmer. Ever hated your in-laws so much you wanted to kill them? That's what Eugene Palmer had in mind. This is Tammy Palmer. She was allegedly murdered in Stony Point, New York on September 24, 2012. 7 years later, Palmer was named as the 523rd fugitive to be placed on the FBI's most wanted list, but was later removed in June 2022. Palmer's son John was married to Tammy, and the couple lived together with their 2 children at a property owned by Eugene in Stony Point, New York, while Eugene lived next door. The relationship between the two began to deteriorate, and they eventually started seeing other people. Tammy filed for a restraining order against John. This enraged Eugene. Tammy also threatened to file for divorce and sue for the land belonging to Eugene. Authorities say this started a feud between Eugene and Tammy that would culminate in a heated confrontation several days before the murder. It was a Monday morning, this 24th of September 2012. Tammy walked her 2 children to the school. It is believed that Eugene Palmer hid in the woods, lying in wait to ambush her returning home. When Tammy walked back home, Palmer allegedly began firing his shotgun at her from a distance. It took a total of 3 shots before Tammy would succumb to her wounds. After the shooting, Palmer fled the scene in a green Dodge Ram pickup truck. It would later be found abandoned outside Harriman State Park in Rockland County. Police search dogs trailed his scent to a campground in the woods. Despite multiple searches, no further trace of Palmer has been found since. In September 2014, a New York Supreme Court judge awarded Tammy's children $2.15 million, equivalent to $2.46 million in 2021, the estimated value of Palmer's entire estate, after determining by a preponderance of the evidence that Palmer killed their mother. Even to this day, he has been removed from the 10 most wanted list, but still remains a wanted fugitive. Number 6. H.H. Holmes. Chicago has had its fair share of killers, but perhaps none more haunting than Erman Webster Mudgett Holmes, or simply H.H. Holmes, was a notorious serial killer in the late 19th century. He's often referred to as America's first serial killer due to the scale and complexity of his crimes. Holmes built a hotel in Chicago which he designed specifically to lure in unsuspecting guests, many of whom were women. The hotel was a labyrinth of secret passageways, windowless rooms, soundproof walls, and even a gas chamber. Holmes would offer guests discounted rates for staying in these rooms, only to trap and kill them. It is believed that he killed at least 9 people in this hotel, although the actual number of his victims may never be known for sure. Holmes was also known for his insurance fraud schemes. He would take out policies on people's lives, kill them, profit, and collect the money. One of his most infamous victims was his own business partner, Benjamin Pitezel. Holmes killed Pitezel and then tried to stage it as an accidental death in order to collect on the insurance policy. Holmes was eventually caught and brought to trial for the murder of Pitezel. During the trial, many other victims' remains were discovered on the hotel property. Holmes was found guilty and sentenced to death. Holmes is known not only for the scale of his crimes, but also for his cold and calculated nature. He showed no remorse for his actions and even admitted to enjoying killing people. His story has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and even a popular television series. Number 5. Pedro Lopez. Pedro Lopez, also known as the Monster of the Andes, is a Colombian serial killer who was convicted of killing more than 100 girls in the 1970s and 1980s in Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. Lopez's first known murder was in 1969, when he was just 21 years old. He was arrested and imprisoned for the killing of a young girl, but was released due to overcrowding in the prison system. From there, he began his killing spree, targeting young girls between the ages of 9 and 12, often luring them away from their homes or schools. He was able to evade capture for years by frequently moving between countries and changing his identity. However, in 1980, he was finally arrested in Ecuador after attempting to abduct a young girl. He confessed to killing over 300 girls, but later recanted, claiming that he had only killed 110. Lopez was convicted of multiple murders in Ecuador and was sentenced to life in prison. However, due to a law at the time that limited prison sentences to just 16 years, he was released in 1998 for good behavior and promptly deported to Colombia. His whereabouts since then are unknown.
Our next witness will be Mr. TOMMASO BUSCETTA.
Number 4. Tommaso Buscetta. Tommaso Buscetta was an Italian mafia boss who became known for his cooperation with Italian and American law enforcement agencies in the 1980s. Born in Palermo, Sicily in 1928, Buscetta joined the Sicilian mafia at a young age and quickly rose through the ranks. He became involved in drug trafficking and was responsible for several murders. However, in 1980, Buscetta was arrested and extradited to Brazil, where he was eventually caught by Italian authorities. Facing life in prison, he decided to cooperate with the Italian government and began providing information about the inner workings of the mafia. This was an unprecedented move, as it was the first time a high-ranking member of the mafia had agreed to testify against his former associates. Buscetta's cooperation was instrumental in the prosecution of hundreds of mafia members, including several top bosses. He provided information about the mafia's organizational structure, its methods of operation, and its involvement in drug trafficking, extortion, and murder. His testimony helped to break the code of silence that had long protected the mafia and allowed it to operate with impunity. After his cooperation, Buscetta was given a new identity and moved to the United States, where he continued to cooperate with law enforcement. He died of cancer in 2000, but his legacy lives on. Buscetta's cooperation paved the way for other mafia informants, and his testimony was a turning point in the fight against organized crime in Italy and beyond. In recognition of his contribution, Buscetta was awarded the Order of Merit of the Italian Republic, one of the highest honors that can be bestowed on an Italian citizen. His story has been the subject of books, movies, and documentaries, and he remains an iconic figure in the fight against organized crime. Number 3. Dennis Lynn Rader, the BTK Strangler. Bind, torture, kill, or BTK. This is the mantra Dennis Lynn Rader believed in and which earned him the moniker of the BTK Strangler. He murdered 10 people in Wichita, Kansas between 1974 to 1991. He gained notoriety for his sadistic and elaborate methods of torture and murder, as well as his taunting letters to the media and police. Rader's first known murders occurred in 1974 when he killed 4 members of the Otero family in their home. He went on to murder several more victims throughout the 1970s and 80s, including women and children. Rader would often stalk and then break into his victims' homes, doing all sorts of unspeakable things to them before eventually killing them. Despite a widespread investigation by law enforcement, Rader remained elusive and taunted authorities with letters to the media and police. In one particularly chilling letter, he included a poem describing the murder of one of his victims in graphic detail. He would continue to send letters over the course of several decades, even when he was not actively killing. In 2004, after over 30 years of evading law enforcement, Rader made a critical mistake by sending a floppy disk to a local news station that contained metadata linking the disk to a computer at his church. Investigators were eventually able to trace the disk back to Rader, leading to his arrest and eventual conviction in 2005. During his trial, Rader pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Rader's case is notable for the heinous nature of his crimes and his apparent need for attention and notoriety, as well as the technology that ultimately led to his capture after decades of eluding law enforcement.
Find him skydiving or motorcycling, please welcome Rodney ALCALA. Rod, welcome.
Number 2. Rodney Alcala, the dating game killer. Rodney Alcala received the nickname the dating game killer thanks to his appearance as a contestant on the popular TV show of the same name in 1978. His date from that appearance declined the rendezvous, finding him creepy. Turns out she had good intuition. Born in Texas in 1943, Alcala had a troubled childhood and was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder as an adult. Alcala's first known victim was an 8-year-old girl whom he attacked. In the 1970s, Alcala began a spree of murders, targeting young women and girls in California. He would often lure his victims with the promise of photography work, as he was known for his skill as a photographer. Alcala was arrested and convicted for the murder of 12-year-old Robin Samso in 1980, but his true body count is believed to be much higher. In addition to his murders, Alcala was also known for his cruelty towards his victims. He was also known to take photographs of his victims before and after killing them. Alcala was sentenced to death for the murders of Robin Samso and 4 other women in 1980, but his sentence was overturned twice on technicalities. He was finally resentenced to death in 2010 and died in prison in 2021. Number 1. John Wayne Gacy, the Killer Clown. John Wayne Gacy, also known as the Killer Clown, was an American serial killer who was convicted of murdering at least 33 young men and boys between 1972 and 1978 in Illinois. Gacy was born on March 17, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois, and grew up in a troubled household with an abusive father. Despite his troubled upbringing, Gacy managed to graduate high school and attend business college. Gacy was married twice and had 2 children, but he was known for his compulsive behavior, which included the torture and murder of young men and boys. His first known murder occurred in 1972, and his victims were typically lured to his home under the pretense of a job opportunity with good pay or other form of enticement. Gacy's crimes went unnoticed for several years, and he was even able to perform as a clown at children's birthday parties and other events. However, in 1978, police discovered human remains in the crawl space beneath Gacy's home, leading to his arrest and eventual conviction for murder. Gacy was sentenced to death and spent several years on death row before he was executed by lethal injection in 1994. And those were the top 15 evil people the FBI wants you to forget. Honestly, talking about this many murderers and malign malevolent murderers makes me want to take a bath. Let's just hope I don't get caught out by a psycho.